guys, it's Kelly here, and today we're going to be making a card that's featuring one of the masterpiece items from the new Simon Says Stamp Masterpiece box. This is the Whimsy Alphas, which is the W+9 stamp set that's included in the box. And then I'm also going to be using, all the stamps are by W+9, that's Pretty Peonies, the Flora and Fauna 2, and then later on I'm going to be bringing in hand-lettered Hello. So I'm working on a Simon Says Stamp grid paper, and this is super helpful, especially when you're trying to line up letters. So I'm going to use a T-square ruler to draw my line so that all of my letters are even. And then I am going to line up my L with that middle line. So that's my hello. I'm spelling out hello. It is 5 letters. So that middle one will absolutely be dead center in the middle. So once you get that one lined up, it's pretty easy to get the other one lined up. So I just work kind of out from there. So I put down the center letter and then work to the left and to the right, make sure that I get really good spacing. And that grid paper helps a ton to be able to see like how many squares they are apart. This is just cut out of, the masks are just cut out of full sticky back Post-its. So I'm going to be doing some stamping and masking. The intention here was to do a 1-layer card. That's always my intention. Do you know that? Like when I start, my intention is always to do a 1-layer card. And sometimes just don't work out that way. This is one of those times. So I'm just going to stamp and mask as I go. The idea was to kind of build up around that hello a piece in the background that would be a top focal point. And I didn't show you all of the stamping because, as you can see there, my head is in a ton of it. So I could see where the stamping was going down. Here is why this is not a 1-layer card. So we're going to stamp this beautiful flower, and then we are promptly going to drop my block on my paper. So I'm like, yeah, whatever, we're not doing this again. So I just continued stamping and figured I would handle it at a later date. Well, at a later time, not a later date. This didn't take me 2 days to do. It took me about an hour in real time. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and remove all of those masks, and there were quite a few. And then I'm going to move into the Copic coloring. Now I left in the hello masks. Like I said, these are made out of, oh, erase that line. Oh yeah, erase that line. If you put Copic Silver Pencil, you're never getting it back up. You can't erase it once the alcohol ink is on top of it. So make sure to erase it first. But anyway, now we're going to go into the Copic coloring. I knew that the Copics were probably going to soak through my masks, so I tried to be aware when I was coloring around them to make sure I wasn't going right over top of them, but I knew I might have some bleeding. So we'll talk about that later when we get to that, how I worked around that. But anyway, the leaves are small, so instead of doing 4 colors here, I just did 3, working with a super light hand and just using some light flicking motions to blend my color, and then going over the entire leaf with the full lightest color at the last time. I like to blend my leaves differently. Sometimes I like to make one side lighter than the other. Sometimes I like to put my dark in the center. It just depends on how the leaves are drawn and how much variation I'm looking for. There really isn't a wrong way to do it. But if you are stamping things like this is, where all these things are layered, you should be conscientious of a leaf that falls behind something that might be darker than the rest of your leaves, just because there wouldn't be a highlight that has something on top of it. So I showed you basically a couple of everything because it is a lot of coloring, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but I didn't show you all of them because I figured it would get pretty monotonous after a while. So here I'm coloring in the flowers. The Pretty Peonies is actually a builder set, which is completely beautiful, but builder sets don't allow me to color, and coloring is what makes me happy. So I just use the outline, and yeah, that works for me. So when you're coloring flowers, when you're coloring anything, really, you need to pay attention to the direction that it flows. If you try to color against the grain, it's going to look strange. So when you're looking at the image, look to see how the artist drew it. In this case, Dawn drew some of the petals so that they were turned back on the outside, and then some of the ones that are closer in are turned up. So the shadows are going to be on different places. Here it's going to be on the center, but then on the ones that are turned up, it's going to be on the bottom, and the highlight will actually be on the top. So it'll look like you have a ton of really dark color right there. But we're just going to make sure that we pay attention to that when it comes time for our darkest shading. And basically, I'm trying to conserve my highlight with flowers. That's what gives you the separation of the petals, is your highlights and your shadows. You want them to be distinct. You don't want it to be like one big mushy flower. So I usually just go in and put in little lines of color the first time around, working from my lightest to my darkest. I'm not doing a ton of blending. Just getting the color down is what's important to me right now, and getting it in the right areas. Now with the darkest color, I did not put that in the petals that were upturned. I only put it in the petals that were turned down because I felt like that would be darker. So from here, we're going to start from the darkest, going back into the lightest, and we're going to start bringing those colors out into the petals. So just a very light hand. We're doing some light flicking motions. You don't want to cover the whole petal. You want to make sure you conserve that highlight. That's going to be your lightest color. And anytime you're coloring, usually your two midtones, if you use 4 colors like I do, are going to be the majority of what your flower is colored. You should have just a little bit of a highlight and just a little bit of a super dark shadow. So here I'm just going back over kind of the whole thing with my lightest color. And this was a new combination for me. I tend to get stuck in ruts with colors that I like, so I was kind of trying to push those boundaries just for myself. And I felt like I lost a lot of the dark. So I'm just going to go back in with that darkest color and put some of it back in. I'm not going to need to go over it and re-blend it. It wasn't that big of a difference. And then these are the colors that I picked for the center. In this stamp set, there is a center stamp that you can use. I didn't want to have to go back and try to dope out where all of those centers should be stamped. So I just opted to do what they call stippling, just a bunch of tiny little dots. And I went from darkest color to lightest color to make sure those were, shaded how the petal would be shaded. And I felt like that worked for me. So here I've picked some RVs, red violets, that are more of like a raspberry shade. And again, this is a new color combination for me. This isn't something that I normally do. Usually when I do red violets, I hang out in the 0 section. So everything is hot pink and, super bright. I really did like both of these combinations. They are, something that's just a little bit different. I did feel like after doing the purplish pink, the raspberry colored flowers, the card was starting to have a really fall feel to me. And I was like, hello, it's July. I don't want this to feel like fall. So I tried to bring in some brightness with my butterflies to kind of counteract all of the fall-ish that was going on. But really, there isn't ever a right or a wrong time to be creating something. You're using certain colors, like just use whatever you like. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. It's a card. It's not life and death. So I'm doing the same thing. This is the smaller version of the peony, but I am doing the exact same thing. I'm just trying to be more conscientious about how tiny my lines are. This is, it's just something that comes with practice. Being able to put in those little lines and not have a ton of bleeding into other areas. So just stick with it. Don't get discouraged. Everybody started somewhere, and the more you do it, the better that you will get at it. I'm sure you guys have heard me say 100 times, like you didn't use my Copics for a really long time because I got really discouraged and I felt like it just wasn't going to be a medium for me. And then look at us now. We're Copic coloring everything. I don't think I have a card that doesn't have Copic coloring on it somewhere, some way. So, this is going to be that medium tone, and we are, putting that in there and leaving just that little bit of that highlight to make sure that all of our petals stay separated from one another. And you could even leave it like this. Like if you like a really I don't want to say severe because that sounds bad. a really strong highlight. You could leave a white highlight. That's just not how I prefer to do it. I'm kind of scared of something that strong, but it is pretty. And then I colored the centers for the raspberry ones the same way that I colored the centers for the red ones. Nothing was different. I tried to keep it pretty consistent. So here's those bright colors I was talking about that we're going to use for the butterflies. I have 2 large butterflies and 1 small one. When I struggle with color combinations, like once I started doing this, I told you, felt fall. And I was like, no, I don't want it to feel fall. I want it to feel summer. So what I did was I went on Pinterest, and I have a board that's called Fabulous Color Combinations, and there are things that I have really liked that I have pinned over time, and I went through and looked for one that already had that red and that purple in it, and then I tried to find something else that was in a color combination, and this like yellowish orange color just kind of like really popped out at me, and I was like, yeah, I feel like add a little sunshine to these flowers and it'll be much more summery. So I kept the coloring on the butterflies super simple. You can get as involved, as detailed as you want. Butterflies are such fun things to color because they can literally be any color, any way you want to shade it, do a gradient, draw in your own details. I mean, they can literally look like anything, and they are a super good time. I love me some butterflies. I kept this one kind of simple because it is a busier card already. So I just did the darkest shading toward the center of the body, and then the outside of the wings the lightest. And this is just super quick coloring. I mean, you're just doing some, light feathering. I left his body yellow because I didn't want it to be all dark in the center. And then I just blended the whole thing out with the lightest color using those, super light flicking motions. And that was really all I did to it. It did not need a ton of stuff. Here, this is how I'm going to fix that. Oh my God, I dropped my black on my card and now it's never going to go the way that I wanted it to go. I am outlining my coloring with some blue greens. I like to do this period blue or blue greens just because it helps those other colors kind of pop out. It also helps mask anywhere you might have gone out of the lines. So once I went in with the dark blue green, it's not even dark, medium blue green, I then blended that out with the BG11, which is super light. And now I'm going to go ahead and remove those masks. You can see where it did kind of bleed. It didn't leave a crisp edge. I'm a clean and simple card maker. I like clean lines. If those blurry lines don't bother you, don't worry about it. But they bothered me. So I tried to clean it up with a 0 marker just to kind of push everything out of the letters. And then I'm going to go back in with that T-square ruler and outline my letters just because I just like clean lines. I can't help it. So I just went through and did that. Obviously the O, I just kind of had to wing it. I couldn't use a ruler for that. And then I started filling them in, and I thought, well, maybe I would do, I would go over the letters with the lightest C marker, which is a cool gray, and see if I liked that with a shadow. I didn't. I loved the shadow because I have a love affair with shadows. We're long-term buddies. So I went in with my darkest color, which was a C7. This is normally a little darker than I would usually go for a shadow, but you have to remember how much coloring we have in the background. So if I'm going to make these letters pop out, I'm really going to have to come up with some contrast. So I did the C7, I'm blending it out with the C5, and then I'll blend it out again with the C3. You could go so far as to blending it out with the C1, but I didn't really feel like it was necessary because there was so much going on in the background, and with your lighter colors, you run the risk of picking up another color in the background and dragging it. So since I didn't really like the C1 by itself, I decided I was going to go in and do the letters in the same colors that I did that background color. So I'm starting with that BG11 and filling the whole thing in. And then I did a bottom to top gradient. So just using light flicking motions. I mean, I know it looks fast. It is sped up a little bit, but it really is super quick. It's a wonderful way to kind of highlight your letters and get a different look with a gradient. So each time I'm not covering the color before it. I'm just adding a little bit more on top of it, but I'm not covering what's already there. And then you just try to keep it consistent across all of your letters so that they're ending in the same spot. You don't, it doesn't make sense when you look at it and they all end in different areas. You want it to be consistent so it's not too busy. And then again, just, go over it with my lights color, blend everything together. And I really liked that a lot. So now I have to figure out what I'm going to do with that spot where I dropped my block. And I decided that I was just going to trim the panel by hand. I grew up in a generation of crafters where we didn't have dyes. So I do a ton of fussy cutting. I have always done a ton of fussy cutting, so it doesn't bother me. If you're not comfortable with that, you could have done like a straight edge or a V-cut edge. You could have done a couple of different ways to cut that end off and still make it interesting. I'm popping this up on some foam tape. Foam tape. That's not foam tape. It's fun foam. Oh my goodness. It's a sheet of fun foam, ladies and gents. And then I'm just going to pop that up off of a white card base, which is basically the same kind of idea I was going for with a one layer. It's just creating, it just has a little bit more dimension. It's not the worst thing in the world that could happen. So here's that hand lettered hello I was talking about before, which is hands down one of my favorite sets. Goes with everything. And I wanted to heat emboss the little gorgeous that's on it. Quite some time ago, I kind of fell in love with the little label look where you white heat emboss something on black and then trim it down to be a little label. I find that it works really well for me. I love just the clean black and white that it gives. I did add foam tape actually that time to the back of that little gorgeous after I cut it down. And now I'm basically adding Wink of Stella to the entire card. Like the whole thing. I tried to just add it to the flowers, but then I added it to the butterflies, and then I added it to everything except the leaves and the lettering. Like, let's just be honest, that thing is totally Wink of Stella. And then that is the whole card. So even though it came out a little differently, just a little differently than I had originally intended, I still really love it, and it's got a lot of good colors. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I will catch you guys on the next one. Have a wonderful day. Bye.